as the director of the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Washington University. I'm very pleased to be able to provide the annual State of the Knight ADRC Tuesday noon seminar. And of course, under normal circumstances, we would have done this in person, but we appreciate the advantages of being able to stay connected via these virtual means. So first, let me provide you with my disclosure statement. And I'm not receiving any income from industry. So here is the Knight ADRC faculty, staff, and supporters as of 5 years ago, 2015. At that time, we had 45 faculty and 85 staff, and we represented 20 different departments, not simply at the School of Medicine, but also on the Danforth campus as well. So a very interdisciplinary group. And these faculty and staff, of course, are the premier individuals that make our center such a remarkably productive and influential center in the world of Alzheimer's disease. So all kudos to our faculty and our staff. I want to just point out that Dave Holtzman, Randy Bateman, and now Carlos Cruchaga are the associate directors of the Knight ADRC. We just recently, at end of May, put in a renewal application for our program project, the Adult Children Study, and in that application, Tammy Benzinger and Kenji Zhang, who is not shown here, are the associate directors, with myself as the principal director. In this photograph, many talented investigators, core leaders, and also supporters. So we have members of the African American Advisory Board here. Seated next to me is Norman Seay. And on this side, Ida Goodwin-Wolfach, a philanthropist supporting us, Joanne Knight, and in this case, David Farrell. And many of our neurologists also are clinicians in our faculty outpatient service, the Memory Diagnostic Center. So just as this research center, the Memory and Aging Project of the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, is at the top in terms of Alzheimer research, our Memory Diagnostic Center, the physicians and the staff are remarkably talented and productive in what they do. It's a wonderful specialty service provided by our physicians, including Nupur Ghoshal and Randy Bateman, Dave Holtzman, Eric Music, Suzanne Schindler, many others at the Memory Diagnostic Center. I also want to point out that our research office, the Memory and Aging Project, has been just exceptionally well served by nurse clinicians who take on a managerial role. In the back here, you'll see Mary Coates, who first joined the Memory and Aging Project in 1986, and next to her, our current operations manager, Maria Carroll. And then I want to point out also Linda Kruger, who is the administrative assistant for the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and keeps my schedule because I fail miserably at trying to do so. So she makes sure I get to the right place at the right time. And finally, with all of this remarkable group, I would be remiss if I didn't point out how exceptionally we've been served as an Alzheimer Research Center, and I've been served as director by our executive directors, originally Virginia Buckles, and then as of a little more than a year, a couple of years now, Krista Mulder, who trained with Virginia and now has taken over as executive director. We're exceptionally fortunate to have these individuals serve the Knight ADRC as executive director. And of course, we also have our dedicated participants, and I'll be discussing them further as we go along. Now, I said this is from 2015. We would have, had we had an in-person Knight ADRC, State of the Knight ADRC meeting, we would have taken a photograph there right following it, but now we're going to do it by headshot. So you should, many of you have provided Jennifer Phillips with your headshot, but please, if you haven't, do so that we can put the composite together and have an updated Knight ADRC faculty, investigator, staff photograph. So in the past 12 plus months, we've had new faculty and staff join us, listed here. And we've said goodbye to some people who have moved on to different ventures, including Anastasia, who now is a first-year medical student at the University of Missouri in Columbia. Some have retired, some have moved to another institution, and others have taken on new positions. I will point out that many of the individuals listed here have done remarkably well in coming on board in the spring and having to do much of their training remotely, but they've all done a good job. And I would also indicate that another nurse practitioner in the Memory Diagnostic Center, Jessica Spring, is augmenting our nurse practitioner, Cassandra Ward. So we're very pleased that people have not only joined us, but joined us under unusual circumstances and still completed their training and are now contributing. So thanks to all of them. Here are our new faculty members. Joy Balls-Berry, as a St. Louis native, did her master's work at Washington University, has had a number of academic positions, and joins us now after several years at Mayo Clinic Rochester. And I'll be talking more about her role in just a moment. Kyle Womack joins us from University of Texas Southwestern, where he was affiliated with the Alzheimer's Disease Center there for some 18 years. And Yoni Kipnis comes to us from the University of Virginia, where he has established a very impressive research team, and we're fortunate to have him join us now. Just for so that we try to stay consistent, and in terminology and language use, we provide this slide. It's not different from what I've provided in the past, but just to go through it once again. Sometimes people like to provide as an abbreviation for the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, KADRC, is very insistent that we do not do that, but instead we appropriately call it the Knight ADRC. So please don't use that KADRC abbreviation, but the Knight ADRC. There's a lot of discussion in medical publishing and people who write AMA guidelines and so forth about eponyms. The possessive eponyms, such as Alzheimer's disease, would imply one of two things: that Alzheimer himself had the disease, it was recognized in him, and so it's his disease, or in some way he is responsible for it. He owned it, or he developed it himself, such as Stedman's Medical Dictionary. That would be appropriate use of the possessive eponym. But for diseases that are associated with a person who described it but didn't have the disease, didn't own the disease, we talk about, or geographic or origin of disease, we talk about Lyme disease, we talk about Down syndrome. We don't say Down syndrome or Lyme's disease, and we should say appropriately Alzheimer's disease without the apostrophe S. The terminology for the clinical stage of Alzheimer's disease has varied over the years. DAT referred dementia of the Alzheimer type. Now we use Alzheimer's disease dementia to refer to the symptomatic phase. In our memory and aging project, our clinical core of our Knight ADRC program, we prefer not to label our volunteers as subjects. It implies that they're here for us to subject them to things, where we hope instead that they consider themselves participants with us in the research to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Using terms, the participants that underwent a brain MRI is inappropriate, because that refers to inanimate objects, and our participants certainly are not inanimate, they're human. So don't use that to refer to our human participants or anyone human. It's participants who underwent brain imaging. Be aware of misuse of apostrophes when referring to the 6th decade of the last century, the 60s. It's not 60 apostrophe S, it's 60s. And finally, the term MCI, although permeating much of Alzheimer research elsewhere, to us is unsatisfactory because it denotes a syndrome without trying to determine the etiology of that syndrome. So we don't use the term MCI, we stage the severity of the impairment and provide an etiologic diagnosis to the best of our ability. Now, of course, standardization of the lexicon across the Knight ADRC is an ongoing process, and we have examples where we don't always adhere to these things, but I particularly point out Mrs. Knight's wish that we use the not K ADRC, but Knight ADRC, and this is something we will enforce. So people may be found who violate that dictum may be found that they will be severely punished. Another area of compliance, it's dictated by the National Institutes of Health. Any recipient of NIH funds, in accepting those funds, agrees to this method of registering all publications in the PubMed Central to generate a PubMed Central ID number for that specific publication. It must be within 3 months of a paper appearing in print. The senior author is responsible for this. Journals may not do this, and so if you don't take responsibility for it and the journal doesn't, you may be in violation. It's very important to make sure that all of your articles have a PMCID number, your responsibility. It's very important for the rest of us because publications that utilize Knight ADRC resources that have been in print for 3 months or more and the author has not provided a PMCID number, then we will not be awarded our next budget year for grants. So that all of our research would come to a halt until this is rectified. So please take responsibility for generating a PMCID number for all of your publications. Krista Mulder and Howard Palmer can help you with information. So how are we organized in the Knight ADRC? We do many, many things, but an overriding focus is identifying preclinical Alzheimer's disease using molecular biomarkers, both biofluid and neuroimaging. We ask questions: will all older adults who are biomarker positive, i.e. have preclinical Alzheimer's disease, will they all develop symptomatic Alzheimer's disease if they live long enough? Can we characterize the change from asymptomatic cognitive normality to symptomatic Alzheimer's disease in those who have preclinical Alzheimer's disease? And this will be very important to help design secondary prevention trials, particularly in timing the interventions of the experimental agents. And we're quite committed to examining possible racial differences in the presentation of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and particularly evaluating the contribution of social determinants of health to any such observed differences. Most of you are aware that the first weekend in June, we have a participants meeting where we share our research results and planned new studies with our participants. Of course, when the COVID area, we had to postpone that, and we postponed it to the November the 14th, and it will be virtual. We have 7 speakers, myself, plus these 6 individuals on these topics who will pre-record their talks, and then those talks will be available online beginning the last day of October for all participants or any interested individuals to be able to view, and it may generate questions, and they can submit those questions to any of us in advance of the actual meeting, which is on Saturday, November 14th at 10 a.m., where we'll have a Q&A panel regarding the presentations that they have been able to view online. So we hope all of the Knight ADRC faculty and staff will join us on November the 14th for that Q&A session. Well, I said I talk about our clinical core, the Memory and Aging Project, participant characteristics. So we see 822 participants. Of those in the program project, Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, and in the ADRC grant, they're all 65 and older. Together, those 2 grants support 526 older adults. Then the Adult Children Study enrolls people 45 years and older. We have 296 individuals in that program project grant. So the age range of our current active cohort of 822 is from 45 to 96 years. More women than men. Altogether, the 822, 16% are African American. 1 person has participated with us for 33 years and another for 30 years, very dedicated participants. And they come not just from Missouri and Illinois, but from across the country, as you see, from 16 states and from 14 states in addition to Missouri and Illinois. Here are their demographic features. Note that the vast majority of our individuals are cognitively normal as defined by CDR 0. Together, our CDR 0.5 and our CDR 1 symptomatic persons represent about 21% of the total of this 681 individuals. This total registry looks at people 65 and older. So these 2 grants only enroll people 65 and older. Some ACS participants now are 65 and older. Generally well educated. Again, more women than men are African Americans per clinical staging, many mental state, and the ApoE4 carrier status, depending on the clinical status. So we are a biomarker intensive program, obtain biomarkers at baseline and then longitudinally. This is from our ADRC grant, but we can look at the total registry of people 65 and older to see that at least 80% have had 1 or more amyloid PET scans. So had 72% have had 1 or more lumbar punctures, and 87% have had 1 or more brain MRIs. We more recently have inaugurated tau PET, and so we're trying to get up to that same level of participation as we ask people to participate. So this just shows that our participants are really remarkable. These are 65 and older participants are remarkably willing to help us in our biomarker studies by participating. And then the ACS, the Adult Children Study, is, I think, unparalleled. I'm not unaware of any study anywhere in the world that asks their participants to undergo biomarker studies every 3 years, at baseline and 3 years thereafter, and look at the Adult Children Study participation rates across this. It's just remarkable. Even now, 12 years after people have entered the study, amyloid PET still very high, and lumbar puncture just remarkable, just remarkable. It's fallen off here at the 12 years, but it's still the largest longitudinal study of biofluids in the world. Now, all of our cores are to be complemented in helping our participants understand the value of biomarker participation. I'm going to highlight our CSF group here, but really the accolades go to everyone involved in our participant assessments. By the way, before the adult children study was funded in 2005, we did a pilot study of children of our HASD participants, because people didn't think we could enroll middle-aged people to get them to undergo biomarker studies when they were in their 40s and 50s and cognitively normal. So we enrolled a total of 93 original people in the original ACS pilot study from 2002 to 2004, and almost half of them still remain active. Just a remarkably committed group of individuals. I mentioned the CSF collection process as an exemplar of all of our assessments. Here are the neurologists who are involved currently and being willing to do the lumbar puncture to obtain the CSF. We have a premier biofluid core led by Ann Fagan, and now an associate core leader in Suzanne Schindler. But I want to note that for the past 14 years, the glue has been Sushi and her remarkable care of our participants over this time. Here's our voluntary autopsy rate last year, calendar year 2019, of about 77%, including in high interest groups. So example for cognitively normal people who are not really planning on dying and so haven't prepared their consent, but we get about 2/3 of them and about a little more than half of our African Americans. So we always strive to do better, but overall, for all Alzheimer's centers who contribute postmortem cases to NAC, the autopsy rate is 64%, we're at 77%, and the African American autopsy rate across all of the ADCs is 25%, and we are double that. Many of you who are investigators like to use our clinical database, and I just think in general you should certainly do that, but remember that not always when we take a health history and ask the participant or the collateral source if the participant has experienced an illness or not, it's not always highly accurate. So Greg Day and a summer student looked at the report of our participants, mostly cognitively normal CDR0 individuals, whether they have had a stroke. So out of 1,401 participants, 25 said they had a stroke, but when we looked at their brain research MRI, only 8 of them had had a stroke. So the positive predictive value was only 32%. The opposite holds true. People who said, well, I've never had a stroke, when we looked at their brain MRI, they had some silent infarcts. So people don't always know exactly what their medical history is. So just be aware of that. Because our participants are so well characterized and because they're so committed, they are often asked, they're always asked to participate in affiliated research because they are, as I said, a unique cohort of deeply phenotyped people followed longitudinally. We may need to amplify the individuals who we see in the clinical core to add individuals who can participate in affiliated studies, but we can relax the expectation for a new cohort of having longitudinal CSF studies and PET imaging, and perhaps focus on their longitudinal clinical and cognitive performance, obtain blood not only for genotyping, but increasingly for plasma biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease, and see if this would be a cohort that would help our affiliated investigators be able to recruit. I think if we relax the requirement for lumbar puncture and for PET imaging. We'll get better, I hope we will get better recruitment and retention. We'll have more diversity, and I think we'll probably get more symptomatic individuals. Remember, we only have 21% symptomatic individuals now. So hopefully this would reduce our current participant burden. This is still under advisement. We've had preliminary discussion with NIA to get funding because we will need more staff, of course, to see all these individuals, but it's something we're considering. Here's our current organizational chart for the Knight Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Here's the actual ADRC grant. And here are 3 developmental projects. This all began as funding began in May 1st of this year. These developmental projects replaced the former R01 type projects and the former pilot projects. But these are the ones that we have currently. And here are our 2 program projects, HASD and last year of ACS grant. As I say, we've put in a renewal application that would allow us to begin funding in June of 2021 if we're funded. But I just showed the makeup of the, and here's our Diane study as well, and it now has some research projects as well. I've put here the cores that serve each of these projects, sort of color-coded as to where they get their funding to be able to do their activities. And it's interesting, at least to me, that currently among our core leaders and associate leaders, 8 are men, 8 are women, and this is in line. We can always and should always do better in line with our desire to promote racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity as well. Okay, we have these 4 big grants in the organizational chart. They are given an award for 5 years, and that means at the end of that budget cycle, we have to put together a renewal application and request another 5 years if we still have our research goals to meet. So I mentioned the ADRC grant. The renewal application was submitted in April 2019 and was funded as of May 2020, and it will go through April 2025. HASD grant was awarded for its current budget year beginning in May 2019, so that means it will expire in April 2024, which means we are going to have to start planning for its renewal in summer of 2022. The application will go in 2023. Just finished applying for a renewal application for our adult children study. Hopefully it will start next June 2021. So we have a year or two where we're fortunately can catch our breath. We're constantly trying to write renewal applications or constantly writing renewal applications, but we have a year this summer and next summer where we won't have to be in the midst of grant writing and can turn to our other objectives. The 3 grants, ADRC and its 2 program projects together have $36 million in direct costs of the award, and the total costs are $56 million. We are blessed with outstanding faculty, including mid-stage and early-stage investigators. We like to acknowledge our very talented early-stage investigators. One recognition is the Poletsky Award that began in 1996, and last year we had 2 awardees. One, Dr. Azursky from Tim Miller's lab, and the other Jorge Libra-Guerra from the Diane and Diane TU study. The Blumenfeld Award is a more recent award, and in 2020, Chihiro Sato from Randy Bateman's lab was awarded, and the Coppola Award began in 2003, and the 2020 awardee was Sarah Hartz from the Department of Psychiatry. Just an award to current awardees and those to be awarded in the future. These come with a cash gift for use for educational purposes. Sometimes people do not spend down that cash gift. They maybe hold it in place in reserve in case they need it in the future. Families ask us why it hasn't been spent and are putting an end date on when the award can actually be utilized. So if you have a cash award and you haven't spent it, please do so for educational purposes. Otherwise, you may lose the award because the family doesn't want to leave it open-ended. Because our cohort is so valuable and we have such talented investigators, we're often asked to participate in other major studies, and here are some of them in which we are currently involved as collaborators. One from Colin Masters in Melbourne looks at the ABLE study in Australia, as well as ADNI, as well as our ACS study, to try to identify markers of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. Another preclinical consortium with Johns Hopkins, the Baltimore Longitudinal Study on Aging, the Wisconsin Registry for Alzheimer Prevention, are all banded together to look at preclinical Alzheimer's disease. With Mike Weiner from UCSF, we're developing an online CDR to predict cognitive decline. And with Betsa Zlakovic and Arthur Toga from the University of Southern California, we're looking at potential vascular contributions to Alzheimer's disease. I mentioned Sarah Hart. She and her colleague Jessica Mazurski were awarded a pilot study a few years ago to model how we could return individual research results to our participants. And they started with just brain MRI, then applied and were awarded a supplement to the adult children study to plan Alzheimer risk calculator and how we would communicate one's risk to our lay participants. And they have developed such a risk calculator, estimated risk of developing Alzheimer's disease dementia based upon brain MRI, amyloid PET, and ApoE carrier status. They can determine for someone of certain sex, a certain age, what their risk may be, and try to communicate this in terms that our participants can understand. They've been awarded an R01 to do this actual testing of how returning individual research results are accomplished and what it means in terms of understanding one's risk. And we'll look at the consequences of knowing one's risk in their R01. And soon it will launch, very soon. They've already written submitted some manuscripts for publication to describe this. We are a site in two other multi-center national studies, one to look at early onset Alzheimer's disease that is headquartered at Indiana University. Greg Day was our original site PI. Eric Music very gratifyingly and very helpfully served as interim director after Greg departed for Mayo Clinic as of the end of December. But Kyle Womack, our new faculty member, will be taking the leadership of this over from Eric very shortly. So we're supposed to enroll, I think, 2 individuals every 2 months. Of course, COVID-19 has interrupted this. I think we have more than 7 enrolled to date, maybe closer to 14. But we are trying as much as possible to co-enroll these individuals in the Memory and Aging Project. And then under the leadership of Bo Ansis and John Constantino, we have been participating in the Neurodegeneration in Aging Down Syndrome NIAID grant that is now going to be expanded to an Alzheimer Biomarker Consortium in Down Syndrome grant. And we are one of the sites there as well, and had a pilot study to help get us started on that as well. We have many partners across the St. Louis area. Certainly our Greater Missouri chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, our African American Advisory Board, and through the AAAB, Links Incorporated, particularly the St. Louis chapter, our colleagues at the Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging and at the Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders. We benefit from Barnes Jewish Hospital Foundation and its philanthropy, and we have remarkable support from Washington University, from the Chancellor, Chancellor Martin, to Dean Perlmutter, and to Department Chair Dave Holtzman. We are supported in our philanthropy by what formerly was called Alumni and Development, but now is the Advancement Team, led by Pamela Henson, Linda Haney, Pam Morris, and Alex Carr, and by many very generous supporters. I've highlighted the Charles F. and Joanne Knight family, and more recently Roger and Paula Riney, but as most supportive, but everyone has been, everyone listed here has been very generous in helping us achieve our goals. Our African American Advisory Board is outstanding. It's in its 20th year. It's helping us learn about cultural sensitivity and how we can be more welcoming to people of color. Made up of prominent leaders in the African American St. Louis community, currently chaired by Pastor Douglas Petty, and the vice chair, the Reverend C. Jessel Strong. You can see the members, current members listed there. All are exceptionally helpful in trying to further our mission. We lost a member this past year, Mary Harper Thomas. She was a very dedicated supporter of the Knight ADRC, had several roles, including serving on the Seay Lecture Planning Committee, and helped link the St. Louis chapter of the Links organization to the Norman R. Seay Lecture. The Links have been hosting the reception following the Seay Lecture for several years now. So we mourn the loss of Mary Harper Thomas. The 15th Norman R. Seay Lecture will be next month. It will be virtual. It will be presented by Raina Croft from the Oregon Health Science University Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, who is developing and implementing innovative ways to engage the community in research efforts. So we look forward to that. You can contact Murda Spencer to get your link to the Zoom to enable you to listen to Raina on October the 13th at 12 noon. Often the Norman R. Seay Lecture, the in-person Norman R. Seay Lecture, takes place at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. This year it's going to be at 12 noon on a Tuesday, October 13th. Just to note that any ADRC has as its primary mission the goal of fostering and facilitating Alzheimer research and research in related dementias at its institution and beyond. That is, the resources that we generate are meant to be used by not only us, but by others. That's our goal. So we make our resources, data, biospecimens, access to participants available for sharing, and we also promote that use. This is our goal. So we have done, again, because of the remarkable value of our clinical cohort, our participants had in the past 5 years, just for the ADRC grant cycle, 289 requests for our resources, including 90 from investigators outside of Washington University that would support almost $300 million in their federally awarded research and another $22 million in non-federal awards. These requests not only help their investigators complete their studies and in many cases led to important publications, but also resulted in 40 new grants that total now about $44 million. So we are doing our job, but I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this is our duty. We must use our resources not only for ourselves, but for others. So the Memory and Aging Project ID number is unique to an individual. It doesn't include personal health information. It's a 5-digit number. However, we assigned, for a variety of reasons, the MAP ID number to individuals that may not have ever been evaluated in the ADRC or our program projects. For example, people who come in to participate in clinical trials sponsored by the Knight ADRC, but are themselves not volunteers in the Memory and Aging Project. Collateral sources are given a MAP ID, and Memory Diagnostic Center patients as well. There are a variety of reasons why this is so, but just to communicate that not everybody with a MAP ID number necessarily is a MAP participant. Now, we are also generating a global unique identifier, a GUID, the genetics and high throughput omics core and the biostatistics core are doing this together. This is something that is mandated for us and will be useful in ways beyond the MAP ID number, but will not replace the MAP ID number. We still will use our MAP ID number in the ways we're using it now. Now, as a note, generating data sets to be used in publications from using Knight ADRC resources should be generated by the biostatistics core. We have problems when people generate their own data sets as listed here, and it leads to issues we don't want to have to continue to address. So please feel free, not only feel free, do use the biostatistics core to generate your data set. And we will work hard, including incorporating data freezes to enable you to have ready access to the most recent data. The clinical dementia rating and its short informant questionnaire, derived short informant questionnaire, the Ascertain Dementia 8 questionnaire have been trademarked by Office of Technology and Management at Washington University. And so now that not only do we have a copyright, but the trademark means when we talk about the CDR and the AD8 in publications or grants or whatever, at first use, you should indicate the trademark signal as shown here. Now, everyone who wishes to use the CDR or the AD8 in their research or their practice must be approved by the Office of Technology Management. People who are in academics doing research or in clinical care, upon approval, get approval without any cost to them. It's just that we need to know who's using these instruments for what purpose. So, but researchers and clinicians can use it without cost. However, industry, including clinical trials, will have to pay and are paying a licensing fee for this. I mentioned earlier our involvement in the National Down Syndrome effort. Dr. Christina Lessoff-Schlager, before she and her husband relocated to Baltimore, developed a modified version of the CDR for use with Down syndrome individuals, a special adaptation. And that also now has been licensed by OTM. Mentioned earlier, we're interested as a center in exploring possible racial differences, including in biomarkers. The first report came out in JAMA Neurology of 2019 that showed lower cerebrospinal fluid concentrations of tau and p-tau in African Americans and in whites, and seems to be an effect of ApoE4 carrier status. Suzanne Schindler has a paper under review that shows racial differences in coding variants for TREM2, a microglia indicator, and these coding variants are associated with lower concentrations in the CSF of soluble TREM2. Karen Meeker in Bo Ansys' lab has just submitted a paper also under review showing that lower cortical volumes in brain MRI in African Americans compared to whites relates not necessarily to a biologic effect, but to social determinants of health, socioeconomic status. So that again, it's the emphasis on racial differences should not be presumed to necessarily be genetic or biologic, but may be explained by early childhood factors, a lifelong stress due to discrimination, and other factors that collectively are called social determinants of health. We are going to be more formally examining those social determinants of health with a new instrument, the Life Course Influencing Aging and Dementia Questionnaire, or the LIAD. This was developed by a team of individuals at the Knight ADRC led by Marissa Streitz, and is now being piloted in our memory and aging participants. I mentioned Joy Ballsbury as a new faculty member. She now has a new core that she is developing for the Knight ADRC that will address health disparities and equity. So that is an important addition to our overall mission to be more welcoming to people of color. Well, like everyone, COVID-19 has been disruptive to our former operations. We initially began in early March to try to mitigate the effects of COVID-19 by ensuring that ill people were not brought into the Memory and Aging Project for their in-person assessments. And on March 19th, we ceased in-person assessments and began, as did the university, in working remotely. Remarkable response by our clinical core, including our psychometric group, to convert our in-person assessments to remote assessments, including telephone follow-up interviews that allow us to generate a CDR score for our participants, as well as a diagnosis if they're impaired. And remote cognitive testing began later that month as well. We try to stay in contact with our participants through telephone calls and other forms of communications. And it's gone very well. We now are in developing a plan to ramp up our limited in-person clinical assessments, moving from orange to yellow level in the university's code. We will do this, again, very carefully and by certainly monitoring developments in the pandemic with the ultimate goal, of course, of protecting the safety of our participants and our staff. So we are in the process of doing this. If all goes well, we will try to have our first in-person assessments resume towards the end of next month, October. I was going to show a keeping in touch video that was quite well done by our outreach, recruitment and engagement core. It's on the website. I won't show it now because of interest of time. It's about a 5-minute video. Many of you I know have seen it, but if you haven't, please go to the Knight ADRC website and look at it. It's remarkably well done and has very creative, shows our Memory and Aging Project staff and faculty, myself excluded, are very creative. I mentioned our new grant period for the Knight ADRC began May 1, 2020. Here is the administrative structure of this new grant, and we will add to this with putting in Joy Ballsbury's health disparities and equity core as well. We have new, I mentioned the developmental projects is a new feature of this new administrative structure. No longer do we support R01 type projects or the traditional ADRC pilot projects, but now the developmental projects are awarded for at $100,000 a year for up to 2 years. And we also have a new biomarker core that is led by Celeste Karch. We already had a biomarker core in the adult children study, as I mentioned, Ann Fagan, now assisted by Suzanne Schindler, are the fluid biomarker core in the ACS. This biomarker core is primarily looking at obtaining skin fibroblasts to ultimately generate induced pluripotent stem cells. And we have another mandated new component, not called a core, the research education component led by Joy Snyder and Susie Stark, to consolidate our training opportunities for people at different levels of training to ensure that they are exposed to aging and Alzheimer's disease and related dementias to generate the next group of Alzheimer investigators. Here are the three developmental projects that I mentioned just now and a little bit earlier. Two are actually awarded by funds in our NIA ADRC budget, and another one by some of the generous philanthropy that has been provided to the Knight ADRC. The Adult Children Study Renewal application was submitted May 21st, and here is its structure, the administrative structure, and it does support research projects. So two projects are a continuation of projects in our current ACS budget, looking at both neuroimaging, including tau PET, as well as plasma and CSF markers of molecular biomarkers to characterize preclinical Alzheimer's disease and hopefully identify the factors involved in the transition from asymptomatic to symptomatic. And two new projects, one led by Bo Ansis, will be looking at inflammation as mediated by the gut microbiome as a potential factor in perhaps causing an Alzheimer's disease pathology or modulating or mediating its development. And Denise Head also has a project looking very similarly at the effects of physical activity and whether it mediates and modulates preclinical Alzheimer's disease. So we're very excited about this program project renewal application. We, of course, have had many new individuals join the Knight ADRC over the years. Not everyone may recall that the founding director of the Knight ADRC was Leonard Berg, a practicing neurologist who became very interested in his patients who were getting older in the 1970s and developing cognitive impairment, why that might be so. So he inaugurated a brown bag seminar, an interdisciplinary group of medical school faculty who met in the 70s to discuss the literature. And they finally determined that there was so little literature that they should do their own study and generate their own data. So they ultimately got awarded an R01 from the National Institutes of Mental Health that went for 3 years from 1979 to 1982. Again, like the Brown Bag Seminar series, was multidisciplinary, and it generated it originated the clinical dementia rating because our neuropsychologists did not want to classify people based upon their cognitive test performance. They wanted to use cognitive test performance longitudinally as an outcome. And if we identified people using cognitive tests and then monitored them for cognitive performance, we would find that the people who we thought were impaired at the beginning and classified them as such stayed impaired. So we had to independently classify people, and that was the clinical dementia rating, led by Leonard Berg's right-hand person at the time, Charles Hughes, who published it in 1982. So the funding allowed the Memory and Aging Project to be established in 1979, and that's when the first participant was enrolled. Unfortunately, Leonard could not get the National Institute of Mental Health to renew the application in 1983, so the NIA was launching its dementia program under the leadership of Zaven Kachaturian, and Zaven asked Leonard to submit a comprehensive application. It was successful. That is our program project, Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia, beginning in January 1, 1984. It's in its 37th year of continuous funding. Then the next year, we were awarded, under Leonard's direction, the ADRC grant. It's in its 36th year of continuous funding. That original grant had 5 cores and 7 R01 type projects, and it was quite expensive, at least in terms of today's dollar. Well, in 1983, Leonard's right-hand fellow neurologist left Washington University for private practice, so he recruited into the program a new instructor in neurology, and that's me a long time ago. I think I will skip this. So we have a new Knight ADRC Clinical Trials Unit team. The Clinical Trials Unit is led by Joy Snyder, and the Associate Director is Kyle Womack. Here is the photograph of many of the team members, but we're adding additional members all the time. And this is to expand our ability to support clinical trials and determine whether investigational drugs indeed are effective for treating people with Alzheimer's disease dementia. We don't have space at the 4488 building for the clinical trials unit, so there's new space been identified in the Taylor Avenue building, and this is a floor plan of the space which is completing renovation. It looks like the clinical trials unit, and also Kathy Rowe and her Drives laboratory will move to this new space early next month. Well, I just want to conclude by indicating that I am deeply honored to be the director of this Knight ADRC. It's a premier clinical and translational program in the world, perhaps the best in the world. Key ingredients are our participants, our staff, and our investigators. We're growing, we are adding new faculty, we're adding new space. We have tremendous success in our grants, and thanks to all of you who contribute to this, but we always get refunded, and we ask to contribute to many other grants, as I've mentioned. We don't know at the end of if COVID-19 will end and how we will adapt to that, what the new landscape will be for AD. If effective therapy does come on board, perhaps we no longer will study symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, as hopefully all individuals with symptomatic Alzheimer's disease will be treated with new effective therapy. We may still have the basis to continue looking at preclinical Alzheimer's disease because we still want to explore prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps the future will allow us to shift from PET molecular imaging and CSF molecular biomarkers to plasma biomarkers. That would be huge in terms of acceptance of our participants. And of course, we don't know what the new normal will be. We'll have to be flexible and adaptive. We are committed to the study and eventual treatment and prevention of Alzheimer's disease in all people. So as you have heard, we absolutely are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we've had a number of transitions of leadership, and we'll have more in the future. These have been seamless. To date, we have tremendous candidates to take over more leadership responsibility. I particularly want them to be fully indoctrinated into the Knight ADRC ethos. So I'm working hard, even from childhood. Here's my grandson, and I am teaching him about individuals who are CDR 0.5, and unfortunately, he hasn't yet been convinced because he wants to know if those individuals represent MCI. So I've got work to do before we're ready for all of these new trainees to come on board. So with that, I will stop, and I thank you for your attention.